Greetings, microeconomists. Today we are in our very last chapter and our very last episode, chapter 17, looking at behavioral economics and risk. So, to wrap things up in this chapter, we're going through a number of quirks of human behavior. We talked about a few of them already, and now I'll move on to looking at impatience. So, without any further ado, let's get started on impatience. Now, first, to be clear about impatience does not equal irrationality. There are valid reasons to prefer stuff now over the future. If you go in and take some other econ classes, there's a good chance you'll learn about what's called present value, sometimes called present discounted value. The insight there is that money today really is more valuable than money in the future, even if we don't have any inflation. Why is that? Well, the idea is that if you get money today, you can invest it right away and start getting interest and accumulate interest immediately. If your money does not arrive until another year from now, then you're going to miss out on a year of interest. So money today really is more appealing than money in the future, even if you have zero inflation to worry about. So some impatience is rational. There are valid reasons to prefer stuff today over stuff in the future. And there's no reason why people can't be super impatient either. People are allowed to have different preferences. We don't all have to be equally patient. That's fine. So why this goes in the category of quirks. The main issue, though, is that the amount of impatience people pretty consistently display often comes as a surprise to economists. Now, the way I'll tackle this subject will be a bit different from the way that most other economists would. A lot of economists would probably characterize this people being too impatient and probably should become more patient and save more. I would argue instead that people really do have a strong preference for now. I want stuff immediately, and that economists are the ones who need to adjust their expectations and realize that people do have this strong preference for instant gratification. So let's talk about retirement. A lot of economists save for retirement quite diligently, and we think that most people should do the same. A lot of other people save very little for retirement in our view. That does not necessarily mean, though, that most people are wrong and economists are right. Economists could just be a very patient group of people. And if you are patient, then saving makes sense. If you're like most people, though, and you're not super patient, then spending stuff now makes sense. People have different preferences. That's not really a bias. Another issue, so with credit cards, if you look at the terms, if you don't pay off your credit card every month, you pay a lot of interest typically. Could even be 20%. If you pay off your credit card, though, immediately we get the bill, then you pay no interest. So economists do have credit cards. I'm one of them. And I always pay it off in full every month. I never paid the bank any interest at all in my life. I get to pocket the rewards, though, from the credit card program. There's a cashback rewards system with Chase Bank. So I've gotten probably hundreds of dollars over the years from that and paid them no interest. Just realized I'm probably not very popular with Chase Bank. I used to get more credit card offers, but they seem to have mysteriously dried up in the last several months. Well, now we know why. So, if you're very patient, you pay off your credit card in full, you never pay any interest, and you're like an economist like me who has to exploit the bank. I'm hard pressed to name any economist who maintains a credit card debt balance. Okay, maybe one, but other than that, we're pretty good about paying off our credit cards if you're an economist. Economists can be very patient people. Now, most regular folks, though, they often have pretty large balances and they accumulate lots and lots of interest. That's not necessarily irrational. If you really do prefer spending now over spending later, then 20% interest could be tolerable, could be just the expense you're willing to bear to get stuff now rather than later. I wonder what things would look like in some kind of alternative universe where instead of having economists write about regular people, they wrote about us. So in this universe where economists write about regular folks, we say it's really strange how impatient they are. If you ask things from the other point of view, they probably say things like, it's really bizarre how patient economists are. We conducted some research on economists. We found they're generally smart enough that you probably could have gotten a pretty good job straight out of college. However, these bizarrely patient people chose to subject themselves to 5 to 6 years of torture called PhD programs, and they have this very low income in the PhD program in hopes of getting more income later. Why delay gratification by 5 to 6 years? You could have got a good job straight out of college. And then, once they get this really good job with their PhD, they then delay gratification even more by saving huge amounts of money. Economists make no sense. They have this bizarre patience bias. That's how things probably look like from the perspective of normal people. So I don't think anyone's being irrational here. We just have very different tastes about consumption now versus consumption in the future. Here's an illustration of this mismatch between how people really behave with their patients and how economists model their patients. So in most macro models in modern research, you'll see something like this. So you have people's total utility equal to the following. You get some utility, you get some happiness from today's consumption. Now you also get some consumption 3 months from now, you get some happiness from now. However, you prefer stuff now over stuff in the future. Therefore, that future consumption is not quite as appealing as consumption today. As a result, you give that future consumption less weight. So I give full weight to today's consumption, but I give 0.99 to consumption in 3 months. If you make me wait 6 months, I'm going to give it even less weight, 0.99 squared, which is roughly 0.98. If I have to wait 9 months, I give it 0.99 cubed, which is roughly 0.97. So I give less and less significance to consumption that comes further and further in the future. Now, in general terms, that is on the right track. It does reflect that people care more about today than about the distant future. The magnitudes are pretty far off, though. So my other field is in macro, so I've done some research using precisely this framework. Back in February, you guys had one class with a TA guest lectured. Well, that was because I was in California at the time. I had a seminar I was presenting there. So I showed them my macro model, and a behavioral economist in the back raised their hand and said, so you only discount consumption by 1% every 3 months? Don't people discount the future by a lot more than that? Yeah, there's pretty much no support in the experimental evidence that the discounting is so mild. If you make people wait 3 months for their consumption, they're going to discount that by a lot more than just 1%. So that's going to be something well below 0.99. The difficulty I mentioned, though, in the seminar was that if you try a more realistic value for this discount factor, so saying way below 0.99, that's probably not going to get published in macro. 0.99 is the orthodoxy, and that just doesn't match up with how people really behave. So I wouldn't call it bias in human behavior, but rather a persistent refusal by economists to acknowledge just how impatient people really are. People really do want stuff now. Alright, now we're on to our very last quirk. We'll look at equity, fairness. So another one of the cases where your book promotes some myths that are out there in the media. So your book writes, the pursuit of fairness is another common behavior that's important in economic decisions, but the stare theory cannot explain. As before, economic theory does not assume people are selfish. Remember we had rationality earlier? Rationality says people have preferences that are complete and transitive. Complete and transitive does not rule out fairness. That's a myth promoted by the media and sadly promoted by textbook authors who really do know better. So there's a very important paper out there on rational fairness. So the authors are Andreoni and Miller. I've actually met Andreoni. He was my advisor's advisor. So in a PhD program, you have an advisor who helps you through research and tells you what to do, kind of, or gives you some ideas. So my advisor's advisor when he was in grad school was Andreoni. So Andreoni wrote that there's a lot of economic experiments where people do display a preference for fairness. Where we saw earlier in chapter 13 with game theory, we saw a prisoner's dilemma game. So the cooperative outcome is that both prisoners don't confess. However, we saw that in game theory, the dominant strategy is that both players do confess. Well, if you try playing a game in an experiment in a lab, a lot of times people cooperate and don't play the dominant strategy. We talked about public goods and the free rider problem earlier in I think it was chapter 7, if I'm recalling correctly. So we said one issue with public goods and trying to get the market to provide them efficiently was the free rider problem. So someone who doesn't contribute can still benefit from a public good. So examples, with the group project example. So the group project, everyone's effort in the group project is a public good. However, someone who slacks off and doesn't do the work can still benefit from everyone else's effort and get a good grade. If everyone else works hard and the group project goes well and gets a good grade, the person who slacked off can get the benefit as well. So that's the free rider problem. So oftentimes in the laboratory, people don't free ride as much as economic theory expects them to. So they give the public goods. When people bargain in the laboratories, there's often a case where you could take advantage of the situation and get more for yourself than is 50-50. People, though, often don't seize that advantage. Even though they could secure themselves a better than 50-50 split, they often choose, out of fairness, to make the split 50-50 or something more equitable. That is, they leave money on the table when bargaining. So there's a well-documented preference for equity in human behavior. So what Andreoni and Miller ask is that, can we reconcile that with rationality? Is that consistent with preferences that are complete and transitive? And they found the answer is yes. So for the vast majority of subjects, 98%, they could reconcile rationality with their choices over fairness. So a common tool to look at fairness and people's preferences for it is what's called the ultimatum game. It's a very simple game from game theory. Here's how it works. So you have two players. So one player is the proposer and the other player is the decider. So in my example here, I'm saying the stakes are $20. It could be more than that or it could be less than that, but I expect a number based on a paper I co-authored a few years ago. So let's say the stakes are $20. The way the game works is that the proposer then suggests a way to divide that money. So they could say something like, I get $11, you get $9. What do you think? The decider has two options. If the decider says yes, then they get 9 and the proposer gets the 11. The twist in this game, though, is that the decider says no, both players walk away with nothing. So here's how I can use this game to measure people's concern for fairness. You compare it to a baseline where people don't care about fairness at all. So if people really were just totally greedy, just care about the money, here's what happens. Proposer will say, I get $19, you get $1. The decider then thinks, so if I say yes, I get $1. If I say no, both of us get 0. I'd rather get $1 and get $0. So I'll say yes. So the decider is going to accept this offer. The proposer knows that because the decider is going to say yes, I can get away by suggesting such a radically unfair split. The proposer will say, I get 19, you get 1. The decider says yes. So that's a baseline for what would happen if people had zero concern for fairness. If you try it out in a laboratory, though, that almost never happens. Proposers seldom suggest 19-to-1 splits. On the rare occasion when they do, deciders often say no. So this baseline case where people are totally self-interested almost never happens. That then proves that people are not entirely self-interested. Let's be clear though, we're not saying people are irrational. We just said earlier that you can reconcile rationality with fairness. We're saying that people care about things other than money in their preferences, in their rational preferences. There's nothing irrational about caring about things other than just money. We never said economists say people care only about money. That is a myth. You can care about things more than just cash. So how can you rationalize it? So let's compare two options. So it's that the greedy option where you do 19-to-1, I get 19, you get $1. The fair option would be I get 10, you get 10. So if I get $10, I get some certain amount of happiness from that. I also get some happiness from being fair. People have a preference for fairness, so they get some happiness from seeing things that are fair. And if they see things that are unfair, that upsets them. So while I do prefer $19 over $10, I also prefer $10 plus fairness to $19 plus unfairness. So there's nothing irrational about saying 19 is better than 10, but 10 plus fair is better than 19. Now deciders also exhibit some preference for fairness. Like I said earlier, if you try to make a 19-to-1 split with a decider in the real world, they usually say no. Decider is not being irrational. Decider is saying that if I get $0, that gives me this amount of utility. I'll prefer $1 to 0, but if that means $1 plus unfairness and I care about fairness, I'd rather have nothing. So that's not irrational either. It's just showing that people have a preference for fairness. So you can measure people's concern for fairness by looking at how much do they offer. You can also measure the deciders' preference for fairness by seeing what kinds of offers they start to reject. How much money will they sacrifice in the interest of preserving equity? So now, once again, I can promote my own research. I teamed up with Crutchfield, Jarvis, and Olson. So Crutchfield's a med school professor. He used to work at A.T. Still University in Kirksville, Missouri. He's moved on now. Jarvis and Olson were some of my colleagues at Truman State University. We applied the ultimatum game to look at dental students. So Crutchfield was at the A.T. Still, that's a medical school. They also had a dental program. And we wanted to use an economic game to study their preferences for fairness. So the argument was that people's concern for fairness and altruism is important if you're a dentist. So dentists should care for their patients. That's obviously important. Now, how do you measure their concern for their patients? The usual approach in the literature was that they took surveys. The problem we had with that was that anyone can say in a survey, I'm an altruistic person, whether or not that's actually true. Anyone can say, I care about fairness, whether or not you actually care about it. We thought if you play an economic game, now you're going to put your money where your mouth is. You're going to actually sacrifice money to be fair. You're going to make a 10-10 offer instead of a 19-1 offer in order to show that you're being fair. You're giving up money to be fair, so that's how we know, okay, you really do care about fairness because real money is at stake. So we found that dental students tend to be quite altruistic. They often make these 10-10 or 50-50 offers. They don't try to exploit their patients and try to do 19-1. We also found that the fairness tends to increase when they get to their last year of dental school. So the fourth year students made the most generous offers here. They actually offered their subject a majority of the $20. The folks who are in the first, second, and third years would keep a majority for themselves, but they still offered close to 50-50 splits to the patients. And over here you show the overall average for all 4 years together. One thing we also demonstrated is that if the patient was disadvantaged, like if they're disabled or elderly, they often got more generous offers. So dental students seem pretty well behaved to us in our research. Now, it's often asserted among economists that if you're playing for low stakes like $20, then people might not care about that a whole lot and might show a lot of concern for fairness. If you raise the stakes to something really big, or if you had people repeat the game and learn, then this would go away and people really would revert to making these radically unfair offers. That is widely believed among economists, and if you take more econ classes, you'll probably hear that asserted in the classroom at least once. It's not true, though. There's been a lot of experience where people do try raising the stakes, and you still see a preference for fairness. So one experiment actually did involve huge amounts of money. They must have gotten some big grant or something, and they still found a preference for fairness. Another experiment tried going to some impoverished countries where over there, playing for $20 American really could be seen as really high stakes. In those places, people still showed a concern for fairness, even when they're talking about a month's wages in some poor country. There's also been some research comparing across cultures how people play the ultimatum game. In America, it'll be a lot of 50-50 offers, but some people try 60-40. I think the average is 60-40. Some people even try 70-30, and that sometimes gets rejected. In other countries, though, it's different. You can often link this to different norms in the society. There's one famous paper that tried going to lots of tribes and seeing how they play the ultimatum game. So in tribes where there's a lot of cooperation society, where you had to work together a lot, people often made very generous offers. And other tribes of people are much more independent, as kind of each family for itself, then offers were often less equal, and a less equal offer often got accepted. So, social norms shape how people play this game and shape how people care about fairness. And that's not necessarily irrational. All right, that wraps up our very last chapter and our very last episode. So, that's our course. So, best of luck in the final exam. Stay safe out there.